Hello, Matt. Back to another We Are Sunderland morning briefing. It is Monday, the 6th of May. It's just, a couple of days after Sunderland's final game of the season against Sheffield Wednesday. We'll deep dive into that a little bit later on. A quick shout out to the Farm Museum and Cospex Opticians who've obviously supported us since we launched. Again, this is a final sort of call because our Black Cats Bar season ticket giveaway competition closes on Friday, so that's this Friday. So you have just a couple of days left if you want to subscribe to We Are Sunderland. It's just £1 for 6 months worth of coverage, then £2.99 per month after that. Or you can take advantage of our full year offer, and it's just £12 for the entire year. If you subscribe to We Are Sunderland, you could win a pair of Black Cats Bar season tickets for next season. Joe, how are you doing?
There's a question. Not too bad. It's been a long season, hasn't it? I think a lot of people have said that, and it feels like that as well. It feels as though there's been sort of three seasons rolled into one, hasn't it? But just the last 5 or 6 months have been so dispiriting, so disheartening. Decisions which we'll obviously get into at some point. But yeah, it's just been a long all season, typified by what we saw on Saturday. Just another abject performance, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, again, nail on the head. What we'll do is we'll save our sort of season review either for later this week or next week. So keep an eye out for that. For this pod, though, or this morning briefing, we'll sort of just touch on the head coach situation and the Sheffield Wednesday game that we've just had at the weekend. I'll just quickly pull this up. So this is the expected goals trend line from that game. Now, on the face of things, I mean, those stats or the trend line there itself, there wasn't a lot in it in terms of expected goals. And I think that probably reads into the opportunities that Sunderland missed. Now, that's not to take anything away from Sheffield Wednesday, who I thought were the better side. They were just clinical, weren't they? I mean, Sunderland, again, look, for as much as we sit there and talk about how dismal and dreadful that run of form is, there was some gilt-edged chances in there that they just squandered. I mean, I think they're on that Patrick Roberts blazed over the bar, probably just epitomises his season as a whole. But if you look at that, it just pretty criminal, really, isn't it?
It's a funny one because it didn't feel as though that was that sort of an even game. I thought Sheffield Wednesday were in complete control, if I'm perfectly honest. That's how it felt. Yeah. Sunderland were very pedestrian, sluggish, end of season feel, going through the motions. But within that, there were some really, really big opportunities again, just like there was last week against Watford. You mentioned there the Patrick Roberts one. You talk about confidence and things like that for players, and it absolutely is key. Mike Dodd has spoken about that, particularly with the striker situation. But Roberts is another one. Them two chances over the last 2 weeks, the one at the end at Watford where he sort of gets his timing wrong and miscues, and then this one on Saturday, Clark pretty much puts it on a plate from 6 yards out on his left foot, relatively unmarked, and obviously he's way off target. It's just that last season that goes in. It's that simple. The form that he's in and the form that's under in, that goes in. And you can't really miss opportunities like that. Soon after, Job had another one that was kind of seemed a little bit further out, but then his effort was tame, and it just felt as though there was no conviction, no composure or anything. Clark was probably the bright spot. Could very well be his final game in a Sunderland shirt. I thought he did okay. He drew plenty of defenders in on that left-hand side and teed things up for his teammates, but nobody can convert. The goal disallowed from 09, possibly unlucky. I haven't seen it back in terms of how far offside he was, but it just didn't feel as though someone were ever going to get back into that game. As soon as Sheffield Wednesday went in front, and the first goal for Sheffield Wednesday in particular was a really well worked goal. I thought the assist from Barry Bannon was excellent.
Yeah,
but so easy at the same time. Palmer goes untracked behind two men, Styles and Ecker, I think it was, and they got in down that Sunderland's left-hand side quite a lot in the first half. It was just too easy for them. And that's kind of been the theme throughout in recent weeks. You look at the goal at Watford a week ago, it came down that area, didn't it, despite having 5 in defence. Just one simple ball through. So for as much as Sunderland's defence has been okay this season, in the last couple of weeks, certainly they've been breached. When they have been breached, it's been a little too easily, because certainly if you're playing the 5 at the back, you shouldn't be able to concede that goal. Last week, if you're playing the 4, they were just getting overloaded too often for me. I know we saw Styles in midfield, but it was all just a little bit of a mismatch for me. Sheffield Wednesday had the bit between the teeth. They were the ones on the front foot. I know Mike Dodd said that he expected them to be quite cautious in the opening stages, given what was on it, but they were the ones who were the aggressor, and they fully deserved the result. Full credit to Sheffield Wednesday and Danny Rohl for keeping them up. For Sunderland, it was just another game, what's kind of felt exactly the same over the last couple of weeks, certainly since Mike Dodd's tenure.
Yeah, I mean, we pulled up that shot map just there. You mentioned that Patrick Roberts shot, which is the one orange highlighted. If you're watching over on YouTube, if you're listening on pods, then you can always head over to YouTube and check that out. But again, just looking at the shot map, I mean, the blue is obviously the lower end of the expected goals. The Patrick Roberts chance is the highest chance that they had there. It's just been that has just been the story of Sunderland season. Just even the efforts that they are having. I mean, there was so many efforts that were straight at Beadle. He didn't really have anything to do, really, did he? Apart from just stand there and collect the ball.
Well, how many were sort of mishit or lacked conviction, where they just
scuffed,
dragged wide and scuffed like that? Yeah, there was so many like that where I don't know what that is. Is that just sort of an end of season, like fatigue kicking in again, confidence? There were so many opportunities. Like you look at that map and you think, oh, there's been quite a lot of chances, a lot of shots at goal, but there's a lot of them where, like I say, they just sort of scuffing them. And you say Beadle had sort of no worries, did he? There was no particular standout save that he made. The one effort that was close that beat him obviously was Clark's in the first half, out of nothing, that came back off the post. Really unlucky. Yeah. If that goes in, obviously it could be a different game. And I mean, as it turned out, Sheffield Wednesday needed the win with the way results went elsewhere, so that might have brought them out, and then Sunderland could have exploited things. But yeah, there's not, other than the Roberts one, there was none that like you would really think that you would have to score, or there was a lot of, like say, conviction's the word that I keep coming back to in any of those efforts for me.
I mean, we'll just go over a little bit of the game. I've been an advocate to see Callum Styles play in that central midfield area. I didn't think Dodds would revert back to a back four. Sometimes I don't. I'd like to explain the thinking behind the game-to-game sort of changes, because I don't think that obviously changing the formation has actually impacted the way Sunderland have played. I think that they've just been, like you say, generally quite sluggish. But I wanted to see at least Callum Styles given an opportunity before, the decisions made on his future. It's just been a bit, don't want to be too harsh, but it's been a bit of a mediocre loan spell. He hasn't particularly stood out in any grand shape or form. I thought there was one or two touches, decent little passes inside the opening 10 minutes or so, playing through the lines, which I don't think you get when Dan Neil is absent. But it just wasn't enough for me to suggest that that loan should be made permanent. The shape, that would have been I think that is the strongest back four you could have played if you wanted to play a back four, just given obviously the injury situation. But like you say, it just lacked any sort of fluidity, didn't it? I mean, the general consensus tactically, I think, is obviously that Job, when he has played as a number 10, so to speak, or in a midfield three, is that he sort of drives on and runs forward, and whoever played as a number 9 has like dropped deep. But that, for me, I mean, they've tried to do it all season and it just hasn't worked. I don't think I've seen a goal where Job has run in behind. And again, that's not me digging out Job, because I think if you look at his stats alone, it's been a pretty impressive season for him. But again, that game was just a game where I came away with more questions than answers.
It just felt like there was a number 9 shaped hole, like it has done for all the season. And I know that there's been talk of, Luke 9 even said it after the game. Mike Dodd said it a few times. It's not necessarily a number 9 problem. For me, it is.
Yeah,
I think for a lot of people, it is. You're seeing players who are sort of advanced midfield players trying to fill that central striking position, and there's traits that are glaringly missing when they're doing so. Now, you could have a tandem between Alshish and Job, where if they're going to be fluid and rotating around and dragging defenders around, where you think, oh, the odd game that could work. Across a full season, it's not going to work. And you can see that when the balls are going out wide, particularly out to Clark, there's just something, that focal point is missing, and it's been missing all season, and they have to address it. We've spoke about that so many times, and we will all summer, I imagine. They have to address it, and it has to be almost the number 1 priority after the head coach bringing a striker in who's recognised, who can do the job. Try to bring 4 in, the piece today on where Sunderland on Mason Burstow, another one where it just hasn't worked out. it needs somebody for it to work out and be that focal point, absolutely, because otherwise you're getting what we've seen. I mean, Sunderland have scored one goal in the last 6 games, 7 under Mike Dodds. It's just not good enough, is it? It's not good enough at all, particularly at home. The home form was something else that Dodds spoke about after the game, which would maybe come on to the worst home record in the division. But yeah, I think in terms of the shape, it was. I agreed with moving back to a back four because I thought it was going to happen last week. We said it in the team news, didn't we? After the ball run comments of the Millwall game, it felt as though he would do that at Watford, but he kept the back 5. So then I thought it was almost as though he put himself back into a corner and saying he couldn't go and do it again at home. So I did agree with that. In hindsight, you could have matched up with Sheffield because they did get overloads down that side of the field on the left that I mentioned earlier. But there's just no fluidity, is there? Like you mentioned that word. The midfield seemed to be disjointed. Ekwa not been a great season for him. I think you're right to mention Dan Neil as well. You've noticed even just in these 3 games how much of an absence, how much of a big miss he is when he's out of the game. How he dictates possession and things like that. It's just there's just no fluidity. There's no sort of cohesion. It feels almost. And for me, that stems from up front. If you haven't got a focal point, it becomes difficult right the way back. Now, I know you play from the teams play from the back as well, but again, you need that focal point for something to make things happen, because it can't just all come out wide. Teams quickly clicked on to the fact that Sunderland were almost give it to Jack Clark and see what he does. When he's come back from injury, that's been even more difficult for him. So there's just so many questions. I agree with you. It's just end of the season. It just raises so many questions.
I mean, for me, what was my biggest bugbear to take away from the game was, like you say there, the Aushish and the Job role, and the two midfielders playing up front. They drop deep at the same time to get the ball, and I know Sheffield Wednesday sort of tinkered and changed shape throughout the game, but there was times where that back 3 or the 2 centre halves just completely free. Nobody even in front of them, nobody there to occupy them. And like you said, if you, I understand sort of the thinking behind it between trying to, shift them around, move them around with players who are a little bit more light on their feet. They can drop into those pockets of space. But if you don't get the ball to them in those areas, then what's the point? Because you've just got a back 3. It's just pointless.
How often did we acknowledge as well that Agialisi became sort of the most forward runner?
Yeah.
Like there was no sort of deep runs from midfield outside of Job, who was kind of, like I say, he was almost tandeming with Aushish, but Agialisi was the one who was sometimes breaking the lines.
Yeah.
And that's just, again, that's what I'm referring to when I say it's just sort of lacked that bit of cohesion and that fluidity. It's just, it all just seemed disjointed to me. And it shouldn't, because that system in particular, 4-2-3-1, is one that you can almost say that they've recruited for. That's the system that they feel as though is their best shape. Now, obviously, you've got to put the right personnel in them, and they've been hindered by injuries and things like that. And like I said, no striker up front, but it just didn't seem to work on Saturday at all. I don't really know the way around that other than the recruitment in the summer.
I mean, that's one of my questions as well. Look, they have recruited for a 4-2-3-1, but then in January it was almost going to a 3-4-3 by bringing in somebody like Styles, whose best role, or has been his best role, has been as a left wing back. So like that just didn't make any sense to me. I mean, we'll shift it on. We'll leave the game on the back burner.
Just actually, before we do, I think it's worth going back to the team news as well. I think we mentioned the Roberts chance. I think Roberts starting ahead of Rigg was a surprise for me, as was the goalkeeper situation. He confirmed that Patterson has had a bit of a knock. I think that's the one that I referenced a few weeks ago against West Brom. But if he's fit enough for the bench, he's probably fit enough to start. So it seemed a bit of a strange one to change your goalkeeper. Patterson's on this incredible run of consecutive starts as well. So that seemed a bit of a strange one. Again, I can understand why you might want to do it and say, Nathan Bishop's been here, and if Patterson's to go down the line, he's going to have to get a look in. You can understand that a little bit, but the Rigg one in particular, he's been Sunderland's sort of bright spot, you would say, or the one to sort of give a little bit of enthusiasm for. I think you referenced on Saturday as well the contract in the summer. That's going to be huge. Does he feel a little bit miffed about not starting that final game? I know he came on, but just a little bit strange for me, considering that Reek has been out on that right-hand side.
I thought the changes as well, to talk about those changes at half time, I thought they were strange in itself. Now, I find, obviously, we're not going to go into great detail or try and pry into this, but I thought the comments about Patrick Roberts has struggled off the pitch as well this year. I don't actually think, look, apart from he was getting in positions to score those chances, I don't actually think he had a bad game. I don't think he was playing poorly. But then when Riggers come on, I get it. He gives everybody a lift, Chris Riggett, because of his tenacity. He's not afraid to fly into tackles. It's sort of that youthful swagger. But yeah, the Callum Styles experiment didn't work. It was, again, you just left coming away with more questions. What does that say for the future of Styles, Roberts, Corey Evans, again, because he came off the bench? Do they offer him a new deal off the back of it? It was one of those games where, look, I think everybody knew heading into it, just had a feel, and it was get this one out of the way. We'll go into the summer, and there has to be sort of a positive, positive news in the coming weeks on the head coach, etc., which we'll touch on quick, after this. But it showed no sign of sort of slowing down the lack of. It's just been an obscure season, just completely strange.
The end. We talk about momentum and taking things into next season. They've got none of that. They've taken 19 points from 63 in 2024.
Yeah.
Only won 2-13 of Dodds' tenure. Only Rotherham with the worst record in 2024. Mentioned the home record. I say it's the worst home record in the division. I think there's a lot of things that are wrong. If the season went for another couple of weeks, Sunderland are in big trouble, and there's no doubt about that, because you look at the results that happened on Saturday as well, with everyone winning. They finished the season 6 points above the relegation zone. It's absolutely incredible, really, that how much it's dropped off. So they've got the summer, and that's why we've said it quite a lot, that things have got to happen quickly, because you've got to try and spin this, what has just been such a big decline. You've got to try and spin it and try and provide some optimism going into pre-season. You have to.
Yeah, I mean, I've sat there on this pod and said I thought Sunderland would have enough to see them over the line. They did, but under no illusions did I think it would be as close as what it was. I mean, to finish 3 points above Sheffield Wednesday, who fought against relegation all season, I'm not undermining any of the work that Danny Rohl's done there, but that is just not acceptable. I mean, Mike Dodds has come under a bit of flack. I don't think by any stretch of the imagination is he shirking responsibility there. But again, people are right to question, his decisions in games, etc. But the players, he's right to point out the players. He's right to say that players haven't hit the levels that they hit last year, and people have to take responsibility. And I think, that you're right. We're sort of getting into what we're going to talk about in the next coming weeks of, where does responsibility lie? Who needs to take accountability? But the game just epitomised the entire campaign as a whole for me.
No, I totally agree. And you think, and I think Dodds was right as well. We mentioned it on Friday's pod after the press conference. He is right to sort of question some of the players, because how many of them would you say have excelled on last season outside of Clark? Bellingham's had a good season by his standards in terms of coming in young player first full season. How many would you say have hit the levels that they have last season? You would struggle to give justification to any beyond those two, even with the defensive record being on the whole pretty decent, sort of a top 5 or top 6 in the championship. That almost sort of gets overlooked because of what's happened in the season, which might seem a little bit harsh on some of those who are playing, like a Patterson. I think he finished 4th in the league for clean sheets, for example. So you could say he's had a decent season, but it just feels as though there's been so many of them who haven't hit the levels of last season, and ultimately, as a group, as a collective, as a collective, none of them have. But again, it just goes back to saying how important that these next couple of weeks are to try and spin that, to try and get out of this rut, because this is what they're absolutely in a rut. There's no doubt about it. You can't. It's gone on for 4 or 5 months now. This is just a big rut, and it's a big test for where the club are at with the hierarchy and things like that for what comes next.
Yeah, and somebody who I was really impressed by was Danny Rohl. That's the first time we've come, obviously, face to face with him. I've watched the odd game in my previous job. I was at one of his early press conferences. And like I said on the podcast with Dom Howson at the time, I thought that appointment was a gamble. I know that there's plenty of clubs that go that way and appoint a head coach with a decorated CV. We'll get onto the route that Sunderland are going to take. But, I mean, it was, he had a bit of an aura about him. I mean, I would if I'd just, pulled off a great escape like that. And I know this isn't something that he's just done at Sunderland. At the beginning of every post-match press conference, he goes around the room of every journalist in the room, shakes the hand, says the odd word to them, but to then sit down and I actually thought the way he looked into the game, the way he spoke, he was grateful for the opportunity. He wouldn't speak about his future in the heat of the moment. I think that's something that's still, yes, while Sheffield Wednesday have plans, he's having talks with Dijon Chansiri just to obviously discuss his future at Hillsborough. I was really impressed by him. He's somebody that I would like to see. I wouldn't turn my nose up in the Sunderland hot seat. Do I think it'll happen? I think if he's under contract at Sheffield Wednesday, this is just my opinion, I would find that very difficult to see Sunderland paying compensation, just given the murmurings of obviously somebody else who they were linked with Will Still last season. Before we get into the head coach direction, what did you make of Danny Rohl?
Everything you've said, I agree with. I thought he was really impressive. It was good to get a bird's eye view and watch him, how he operates on the touchline. And I think you're right to mention that post-match as well. It sort of differentiated between Danny Rohl, the human being, and Danny Rohl, the head coach. He came across really well as a people person, and then he spoke well about the game and his future. And he just looked absolutely worn out, didn't he? The amount of effort that him and that squad of players have put into getting Sheffield Wednesday safe. You could see it all just kind of pouring out of him. He sort of sat there just thinking, I can't believe that we've done this. And yeah, he operated really well. He was heading and kicking every ball. He was,
so animated.
Yeah, he was animated. He was invested in the game, and obviously got his tactics spot on. And you can see how much Sheffield Wednesday love him. I think Barry Bannon came out and said, he is the man. The club have got to keep him. Before the game, I think he'd said that he's the best head coach he's worked under. Sheffield Wednesday fans sort of serenade his name all afternoon. You can see how much they love him. And I said it at the time as well on Friday. I think you look at how he's united that fan base. There's a lot of boxes that he ticks, and I was really, really impressed by him. I think out of the four sort of names who have been the strongest linked, he's one that really, really stands out to me. Even more so, having sort of seen how his team operate and how he operates as well on and off the field. So they could do a hell of a lot worse than trying to appoint Danny Rohl. But I agree with you. I think the compensation, particularly now with Wednesday staying in the division, becomes a big stumbling block. If it was a stumbling block for Will Still in December, I feel as though it'll be a stumbling block for Rohl as well. A lot will depend on his future and how those talks at Hillsborough are going to continue. And can Sunderland afford to wait to see if they don't materialise the way that the Sheffield want them to? You'd argue probably not. I think we've said it a lot of times. Sunderland need to get a head coach in swiftly, and the Rohl situation feels like it might be one that drags a little bit further into the summer. And I just don't think Sunderland can afford to waste that time away from.
Completely agree. I mean, I think if you've had 12 or 13 games leeway, you're only going to come under more scrutiny if you don't appoint somebody straight away. I mean, look, I'm a big fan just from the only encounter we've had with him this season, face to face. Again, I thought Sheffield Wednesday were impressive. Don't get me wrong; they didn't blow. They weren't a championship top end side, but they were certainly impressive with the way that they set up. We'll sort of move it on to waking up this morning and crazy, rumours, etc. are going around. Obviously, TalkSport this morning has spoken about Will Still saying that he is the man that's looking for a house in the northeast. I mean, take that what you will. Rene Maric, pretty similar to Michael Beale earlier this year. He's followed Mike Dodds. Mike Dodds has followed him on social media. We are getting into silly season a bit, but I think it's to be expected given the length of time, that we've had with Mike Dodds in the dugout. You did a great piece about why there needs to be some transparency from, the board level, what they're going to do. Again, I would like to think that they're approaching. I just think they should have set themselves a deadline. And, for me, the deadline's now passed. End of the season. You've got to make a quick appointment. Just on Will Still in particular, I've listened to various couple of podcasts just with him on, and I do think he is very, very, he will have a good future in the game. But again, it's caught up between, a rock and a hard place with experience, potential. That's what anybody has a risk with in appointing. But I think one point for me that is really important with him is actually he's bilingual. Now, again, you can be like, oh, well, that doesn't mean anything. But Sunderland's squad with a lot of French talent in there, in the English core that they have, I feel like he would be a perfect mould in terms of bringing the squad together for next season.
Yeah, that'll certainly help, particularly if Sunderland are going to stay in that sort of French market and trying to find potential in young French players. But I think just the philosophy of the club anyway points a lot towards Will Still.
Yeah.
We've heard Mike Dodds a couple of times in this last week saying, the recruitment isn't going to change. That is the way that they're going to approach it. They want to buy young players with a ceiling, and then a value, and then the ceiling being higher beyond that. So in that aspect, still feels like that's the way that they could go, because it just sounds as though we've got the youngest squad in the EFL. We now got the youngest head coach in the EFL. That's the way that it feels, though. They want the direction that they want to go in, and then if they can achieve success with this youngest of all departments, what a story that would be. It feels like that's the way that they're trying to go. And I just think, and again, myself and Dom spoke about this on Friday, his exit last week from Reims feels a little bit too coincidental for me. Now, I know there's been strong links with Maric as well, certainly over the last fortnight or so, but I just think that his exit being confirmed, given how much that stumbling block of the compensation fee was in December. I mean, he was your number one man in December.
Yeah.
That doesn't drastically change over the space of 4 months, particularly given the run of form. If he was your number one then, he's still going to be on that list. So if all of a sudden he becomes free, you have to think that they've gone and at least had the conversation with him, or if they thought that they were way down the line with Maric, just sort of as a potential, does this then backtrack? Do you then think you can go back and get the one that you wanted? So I think there's a lot of, I don't know, it feels too coincidental for me for not to be legs in Will Still be the one who gets brought in over the next couple of days.
Yeah, I think you're right to point that out about because the young squad thing got brought up again, the final game of the season, or at least the final press conference. And for me, actually, I think Mike Dodds has done well to manage that message prior to, because we haven't spoken about it for the last 4 or 5 games. I think the last time I remember and mention it was Southampton. But for me, that the youngest team in the AFL thing, you did a great piece over on it. But again, I risk going off on a bit of a rant here, but it's just irrelevant. I mean, there's no trophy for getting there. I mean, where have Sunderland finished? 16th is it this season? It's just, great. They've got the youngest team, and I get, that you can say that this, it acts as a sort of point for players to come to Sunderland and play, and will give young players an opportunity. That is all brilliant, but you have to get results on the pitch. It's not this isn't a game to see how many players can, how many 16-year-olds can we get in the match day squad. Yep, if the talent's great. Look, I'm a huge fan of Chris Rigg. That's not a slight on him. It just equates to nothing, though. If it just boggles my brain, that whole rhetoric.
Yeah, it's something that it sounds and looks good, doesn't it? Yeah. But ultimately, you judge by success in this game. Mike Dodds said that he would like to be, for example, he would like to be judged by things like the principles and the foundations that he put in place at the academy. But ultimately, he's going to be judged on the fact that he's won 2 out of 13 games.
Yeah,
scored 1 in the last 6, scored 7 in those 13 games. Those are the numbers that Dodds is going to get judged on, not necessarily what he's done behind the scenes or what he's had to deal with and how he's navigated through that, which it feels as though there has been those issues. The last couple of weeks he has sort of, certainly on Friday, he did relate to that. But the young squad thing, I mean, I think I did a piece last week. I think there's 2 teams in the Championship era who've been promoted automatically with with one of the top 2 youngest squads. Sunderland were one of them in the first season back in 2005, and I think Wolves in 2009. They're the only 2 teams who've gone up automatically with one of the 2 youngest squads in the division, and that's in how many seasons? 20 seasons.
It's just crazy, because you're right. Look at how long ago that was as well. Football's changed so much as well in that time, and I think if we sit there today, and I agree with Mike Dodds' comments, look, they need more experience, whatever you view experience as a 30-year-old on their career on the way down. I'm not necessarily an advocate for that, because we saw so many times in League One, when Danny Graham came back to the club, Will Grigg, there were players who Sunderland signed. Okay, Grigg was, signed on the back of a impressive run of form at Wigan, etc. But it just didn't work in League One, and they've gone away from that model, and it was the right thing to do. Sunderland needed younger legs, they needed a younger squad, but they do need players who've played at championship level or equivalent elsewhere, where they're not going to have such an adaptation period as what we've seen this year. And again, that sort of brings it back around to the head coach. I think, they're going to have a period of adapting, getting a new squad. And I think for me, which is why they can't afford to waste time.
No, I agree. And I mean, again, we're straying into topics that we'll discuss in the full review as well, but I don't necessarily think it needs full root and branch surgery here.
No.
You just need to sort of be a little bit wiser to having some options, some alternatives, rather than having to turn. I mean, the quote that sticks out for me this season was Michael Beale, I think after the derby in the FA Cup, why he didn't make changes. And he said, I turned around and looked at the bench and they just got younger and younger and younger as I looked along. And you need something different. You need, like you said, not necessarily just bringing all these old heads in who like 30 plus who've had X amount of games, or whatever. Just someone with a bit of now, someone who you can rely on, like a Corey Evans who's there. If he'd have been fit, someone like that. Not like say, not filling the bench with them, not filling the squad with them. Just one or two that you can have around the building, have in the squad. You just wonder how much that would have helped a lot this season with the young group that they've got. And it's just something that they've got to address. But you wonder whether how much they are going to do that, just through the murmurings that you're hearing, and Dodd saying that the recruitment's not going to change, and like say with the idea of him saying that the new head coach has to be from a developmental background because of the squad that's here. I think he said it would be pointless going and getting a different kind of coach, for example. It all just strikes me as though they're going to very much sort of stick to this model, and then hopefully use this season as the experience that they then have. It's a risky game if that is what they're going to do, and you wonder how fans would react to that if that is going to be the case, because obviously the last 4 or 5 months the fans have got very little to feel enthused by with it.
Yeah, I mean, well, the proof's in the pudding, isn't it? You've mentioned the run of form that they've been on since the turn of the year, especially after Mowbray left. The points that they've picked up, it's just been absolutely nowhere near, and that should be a clear warning sign that this is the trajectory that the club is going on. Just a word on the 21s who are in action later today against Wolves. I mean, if anybody can sort of make the Sunderland season end on a high point, it's the youngsters who have been impressive this season from what we've seen.
Absolutely, the 21s and the women's team have been the success stories this season, and rightly have deserved the plaudits that they've got. And the 21 season obviously continues tonight. It's nice to feel a little bit of excitement, isn't it, about it?
Yeah.
I think the last couple of weeks they've been really impressive. I was at the Liverpool game a fortnight ago, and after falling behind, you looked at that Liverpool team. A midfielder who came on in the Premier League yesterday, by the way, against Tottenham, starting in there. Players who were in the Carabao Cup final squad and came off the bench, and Sunderland with a better team. So it's nice to be enthused by a team, given what's happened at first team level. They've deserved to finish where they finished and get through to these playoff stages, and obviously in the International Cup series next season as well. It's at home. It'd be nice to see, with it being a bank holiday, it'd be nice to see plenty of fans down there as well. So they've got a good chance. They went to Wolves and beat Wolves recently, so they've got a good chance to progress there. And I think it's testament, what we've spoken about, the first team level behind like the recruitment and things like that. It is worth saying that the academy level has come on leaps and bounds under this ownership over the last 12 months in particular as well. The restructuring of this league, Sunderland, the team who've absolutely thrived under it. They've not shirked any challenge, and they're right up there, and they're competing with some of the best academies in the country, and academies that they wouldn't have been playing, if the restructuring hadn't happened, and they've more than held their own. So, it's now about, I think Graham Murty said it, just go and enjoy it and see what you can do. Almost, I think, full credit to him and his staff there, because they've done a really good job, and the players seem to have bought into that as well. It feels like a happy camp there. We spoke right at the start of this pod about the Sheffield Wednesday game, and there'd been a bit of a lack of cohesion and sort of belief in the system and the structures. You go and watch the 21s. it's the complete opposite. You can see that they're all invested. They're all bought into how Graham Murphy and John Hewitt are going about things. So, good luck to them, and I hope it goes well for them this afternoon as well.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing for me that I will say is it tends to be when they are the under-21s, a lot of people be like, I'm not going to bother, but they've actually been really good when there's been no first-team players playing. They've been really impressive this season. I think, to touch on the work that Graham Murphy and John Hewittson's done's been, I watched them at length last year, and it felt like a bit of a transitional period. They still picked up results here and there, but Graham Murphy's so passionate. They've got a style of play now, and it's evident when you watch them. I think, last year when they played, I can't remember, I think it was the Premier League Cup, they got beat off Reading, who weren't even in any of the Premier League 2 setups. Again, that doesn't, you can make of that what you will. They got hammered at home. To see the trajectory and the run that or the change from where they've been to where they are now, and a lot of the players are stepping up. You've got under 18s playing at under 21s level. You've got under 15s playing at under 18s level. So it's running through the academy. It's not gone are the days where you have, set up older, younger players who are just sort of, the consensus is that they're coming to the end of their young Sunderland career. There's a real impetus and a sense of belonging down there.
There is, yeah, but there's also a pathway to the first team for them as well, which absolutely helps. And that's why I was keen to point out sort of the development of the academy and how that's gone. Tom Watson coming off the bench at the weekend, he's been one that's been really sort of considered a lot over the last couple of weeks. And you could see a few of them possibly over the next 12 months being on the fringes of that first team squad. There is a pathway there. They bring in the next cohort in with the Central County Leagues and things like that. So, but it goes beyond that for Murty as well. I think Luke O'Nien mentioned him quite a few times at the weekend. The job that he's done with him defensively and the first team, it feels as though he's been a really good appointment for me behind the scenes. He's gone in there and he's obviously bought in and got his way of doing things with the academy. But that translates over to the first team as well. We see him on a match day up in the stands near us, operating down into the dugout and sort of looking and analysing how things go. But then he takes that back to the 21s as well, and they're all invested in it. So it feels like he's been a really good appointment. And like I said, the academy have been a hugely successful story this season for Sunderland.
Yeah, I mean, we'll be at the game later on this afternoon. Thanks again for joining us this morning. As I said, we'll be bringing you a bit more of a season debrief. Of course, we've touched on some of the points there, but we'll go into a bit more of a bumper episode either later this week or next. We've been in partnership with the Farm Museum and Cospex Opticians. If you're watching on YouTube, if you subscribe, then you won't miss a single video. It's just £1 to subscribe to our website. You get £1 for 6 months worth of coverage, and you could be in with a chance of winning Black Cats Bar season tickets for next season. Thanks again for joining us.